just to let you. Great. So welcome, Mary. We're just inviting people in the chat box to let us know where they're from. Great. Great. Oh, I just noticed Linda's in Twyford, so I'm in Reading today, but yeah, not far away from Twyford. Really good to welcome you. I think we will make a start. If you want to mute yourselves for the time being, that would be great. So I was just saying, as before I press record, just saying that my name's Simon Goddard. I'm one of the contractors for Fresh Expressions, and I'm responsible for resourcing and was involved with Mike. I did the technical side of putting the website, the Sharing Jesus website resource together, and Mike's the brains behind the content. Mike, do you want to just introduce yourself briefly?
Hi, I'm Mike Moyner, not many brains, but I've been involved with Fresh Expressions and new types of Christian community and so on for the last 15 or 20 years, and I've researched them, written about them, been advocates for them, all sorts of things like that.
Brilliant. And I so before working for Fresh Expressions, I still am a Baptist minister and was responsible for starting. Hey guys, a Baptist, that's great. Responsible for starting a Fresh Expression in rural Cambridgeshire called Renew, and so come with that experience, and currently working in March with Anglicans in starting some Fresh Expressions there. Just started that in the last month or two. So Mike, we're gonna actually introduce you to the resource shortly. The resource, I don't know, just gives a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Have you looked at the resource? Have you engaged with the videos? Yeah, a couple of thumbs up there. Well, a little bit. No, not yet. Okay. On that basis, we're gonna show you. We've put all of the animations together in one video, and we're gonna show you that now as a way to introduce all of you. Sorry if some of you have sat and watched all the videos already, but Mike, do you want to just introduce what the concept of the Sharing Jesus website before, or the resource before we play that video, and perhaps invite people to think a bit as we watch that.
For joining us. And thank you all for joining us. The resource, for those of you who've looked at it, you'll remember it's not a resource for one-to-one evangelism, although it could help you with that. That's not why we've produced it, because there's lots of excellent material on one-to-one evangelism. This is really for people who want to share their Christian faith in a group context. So we have in mind people who have perhaps started a sort of luncheon club and are saying, well, this is great. These people, they don't go to church. Well, how might we introduce Jesus into our conversations with them, into that context? And so, and you can think of a whole range of outreach activities with young people, with older people, a bereavement group, a teenage group for folks who don't go to church, all sorts of different contexts. How might we actually introduce our Christian faith into that context? And that's the purpose of this resource. And so there are 7 sections to it. There's a section on starting. How might you add an extra dimension, a spiritual dimension into say a teenage group or a luncheon club or a coffee morning? There's a second section on how might we have conversations with a difference in our group. So in a teenage group, for example, you might put out two tables, one with Love Island written on it, another with the name of a celebrity, and you might invite the young people to sit around those 2 tables, discuss the theme, what's been going on in Love Island or whatever, And then after a few minutes, you might say to the two groups, just imagine that God or a spiritual guru dropped in. What would they say about our conversation? So little ideas about how you can connect ordinary conversations about life, about mental health, about what's going on in the news, how you can, you might have a walking group, you might stop for lunch, and you might have a conversation with a difference, and some ideas on how you might do that. There's a third section, which is about how you might introduce exploratory Bible study, and there's some ideas about that. Then there's a section where we say, if you're going to do exploratory Bible study with people in a way that anyone can take part, don't think you've got to answer their questions. Because a lot of people get very tense inside. What happens if they ask a question? Well, you don't need to, and we explain why. And then there's a section on what happens when people disagree with each other, and do you think there's going to be all hell is going to break loose with some almighty argument? How do you manage that in the groups? And again, some very simple approaches that anyone can do. That's the theme of this little website resource. Anyone could do this stuff, and so we suggest a very simple way of managing conflict. There's a section on how you, if you've introduced a discovery Bible study in some way, exploratory Bible study, how might you take people a little bit deeper in their faith and in their study? And then there's a final section on how might you enrich people's experience of exploring Jesus by introducing some forms of very simple worship. So that's the sort of overview, as it were. And Simon, I think, is going to show us some of the animations. Let me just say, each section of the site, it has an animation, and you're going to see these animations. It then has a written guide, and then it has a video story of about 1.5 minutes of someone who's actually done it. So the animation's about 1.5 minutes. The written guide will probably take you 3 or 4 minutes to read, about 4 or 5 minutes at the most. And then there's a video of 1.5 minutes. And I'd make my plug here. When you've looked at the animation, please also look at the written guide, because it gives you all sorts of other ideas and will expand your imaginations and your horizons. So that's me. Let me stop.
That's great. So we're going to play this. It's about 10 minutes in total length. So it's basically all of the animations put together. And we're going to invite you, once you've watched this, to break up into small groups just for a few minutes and talk about what you saw. And as you're watching this, you might want to make a note of any questions that come up, and you can talk about those in your group and then ask those later. This is a workshop, so it's based around you asking questions and us digging deeper as you ask those questions. So let me play the video, and I hope you enjoy.
Maybe you're involved in an outreach project with people who don't go to church, a bereavement support group, for example, or a group that meets for lunch. It's dead easy to add a spiritual dimension and introduce them to a fuller life. All are made to feel welcome whether they choose to take part in this or not, so here's an example of what you can do. Invite those who wish to stay on after the meeting. Gather round 1 or 2 tables. Light some candles. Play some Christian music. Read a story from the Bible or an extract from a collection of Christian spiritual writings. Allow time for silent prayer or reflection. Read a couple of prayers or make up your own. Just 15 minutes max. You could do something like this with almost any outreach initiative. A craft group, a lunch for people who are homeless, a youth group, a community cafe, and more. So why not enhance what you already offer? Why not give people a chance to explore a richer life? No one is compelled to join in, but for those who do, they'll be nourished in their spiritual growth.
Want to share the Christian faith but talking about Jesus would be a step too far? Try conversations with a difference. Choose a topic that interests the group, a news item, a celebrity, well-being, a soap opera, your pets, sport, a music genre, anything the group would like to discuss. Talk about it for a while. Then ask the question that turns it into a different kind of conversation. If God exists, what would God think? Or if you prefer, imagine a great spiritual teacher dropped in. What would they say? Imagine a walking group. When you stop for a drink or a meal, start a conversation with a difference. Invite someone to suggest a topic. After a while, ask the question that makes the conversation different. If God exists, or if a great spiritual teacher dropped in, what would they say? You could do this with young people, at your messy church activity table, with your neighbours, with any group. Want this to feel natural? See the written resource for ideas. People would become more confident in talking about spirituality. They would connect spirituality to life, and they would have fun.
Looking for an easy way to share the Christian faith? Invite people to a spirituality group. You might explain, Jesus is known as one of the world's greatest spiritual teachers. Let's look at some of the stories about him and see what we think. For each story, use Bible talk. Ask 4 questions. If this story happened today, what would it look like? What is it saying to me? Could it make a difference to my life? If so, how? Did it make a difference? If so, how? You could look at the first 3 questions in one session, or you could do them over 3 sessions to keep each session short. Then do an experiment. See if the story does make a difference to people's lives. The key word is experiment. Some experiments bear fruit, others don't. That's life. So don't let people worry about whether the experiment works or not. In the next session, share your experiences. Christians involved can relax, because the Bible does the evangelism. All they have to do is join in. No embarrassment, just authentic conversation. Anyone can take part.
Worried that when using Bible talk, people will ask you a question and you won't know the answer? Or that they'll think your answer is stupid? Solution: there's no need to answer their questions. If they ask a factual question like, who was John the Baptist? Invite them to Google the answer. If it's a question of opinion, like, what about all the suffering in the world? Ask, from what you know about Jesus so far, what do you think he would say? And join in the discussion yourself. Don't worry about people getting the wrong answer, and don't think you need to correct what they say. You may end up discouraging them. If our place in heaven depended on right answers, none of us would get there. We are saved by grace, not by right answers. Just affirm whatever you can in their response. Overlook what you disagree with, and focus on what's most important, connecting them with Jesus. So don't worry about controversial questions. Simply reply, from what you know about Jesus so far, what do you think he would say? You'll be promoting the best spiritual habit of all, relating life to Christ.
When you explore the Christian faith with inquirers who don't go to church, some people are bound to disagree with you and with each other. Don't worry. Disagreement is part of the Christian life. Indeed, the church's 2,000 years of argument. Here's what you might do. Imagine someone in the group says something provocative. Suggest people prayerfully or thoughtfully consider their responses and then share what comes to them. Make it easy to remain silent if someone prefers to listen. Encourage people not to correct, but listen to each other. Remind them that the church is full of different views, and this variety can offer a broader glimpse of God. Suggest that after people have shared their reactions, the group has another brief silence. Then take it in turns for people, if they wish, to say where they have seen godly love in others' responses. Someone's smile, an encouraging expression on a person's face, someone leaning forward to listen, what someone else said. Then let the discussion move on. People will have spoken honestly, everyone will have been heard, no one will have been judged, World War III won't have broken out, and you'll have shown a Christian way to handle disagreement. In the middle of conflict, people will have listened to God.
What might you do after you've introduced people to Jesus? Say you have used Bible talk as described in Discovering. How might you help inquirers go deeper? Here's a possibility. Before the group meets, point one or two people to content you've prayerfully considered, such as a blog, podcast or video that explains the Bible story, gives some background information or suggests how the story applies today. The investigators share what they've learnt before the discussion starts. The group is now accessing wisdom from the church at large. Members rely on the Spirit to work through the Bible, the group as it discusses the Bible passage, experience as people describe their experiences of applying the story, and the wider body as members of the group access Christian resources on the web. One more thing, don't forget to pass around the leadership. When people help to lead, it becomes their group. Sharing leadership generates commitment. Even young children can lead a Bible discussion. An example of this and other great ideas are found elsewhere in this Sharing Jesus resource.
How do you turn an inquirers group into a worshipping community? Well, if you use Bible talk or something similar, you're halfway there. At the beginning or the end of the discussion, why not light a candle? Perhaps play appropriate music or allow 2 or 3 minutes of silent headspace. Encourage people to think positive thoughts for a loved one or a situation in the news, or to reflect on one thing from the Bible discussion. Then invite them to address their thoughts to God as they currently understand the divine. Or else suggest people write a prayer or bring one and read it out. Look for creative gifts and passions within the group. Might someone bring an object to spark a prayer? Might others offer a poem they've selected or written? Might some of the group take photographs to illustrate a theme? Might some be inspired to write tweets or emails as a way of turning their prayers into action? Why not encourage takeaways, asking people to write a social media post or draw a picture expressing what they think God was saying during the gathering? Bit by bit, Bible discussion would expand into richer worship.
That's great. Hope you enjoyed that. We're going to put you into breakout groups now, and let me create. How many of us are there? We create 3 groups, and we're going to give you 5 minutes to talk. While I'm setting the groups up, Mike, do you want to just remind people about what they might be talking about in those groups?
Well, you might just talk about in the groups, how did you react to that material? Why particularly have you come to this webinar? What are the big issues for you? around this sharing Jesus. Perhaps you might even discuss where can you see yourself using some of these ideas, or other people you know using some of the ideas. So those sorts of questions.
Great. I'm going to open the rooms now, and you'll come back automatically after 5 minutes, and we'll see you then. Welcome back. Welcome back. Well, that 5 minutes went really quick, didn't it? And so hopefully you got to meet one or two others and have a bit of a chat about that. So basically the rest, so we've got about 35 minutes up to that time left together. And so this is for you to make comments, to ask questions. So do feel free, having sort of talked about with one another what your questions might be, or some of your responses to the animations or to the resource in general. If you've had more time to look at that, do feel free to unmute and make your comment or ask your question. And if you don't, this is going to be a very quiet 35 minutes.
Can I ask?
Oh, go for it, Guy. Yeah, and then
yeah,
we'll
sorry, Timothy. There seems to be, I may have got it wrong, almost like two strands. One, the kind of discussion within what's going on, and then one, perhaps you invite people to stay behind for or come to separately. Is that right? Is there two kind of model strands with it?
That's interesting, Guy. Yeah, I suppose there is. I hadn't thought of it like that. I think you can, you know, if you've got a group and it's meeting over a sort of neutral agenda, it's a walking group, cycling group, you know, coffee in the morning and so on. And maybe that's enough, but maybe you think, oh, I'd like to up the spiritual temperature. You could go two ways, or you could do both. One is you could introduce these conversations with a difference and just say, you know, is that a fun thing to do? Or you might put on what I would call a spiritual zone at the end of the meeting, which is entirely optional. You know, stay behind and we'll have a little bit of spiritual headspace, some quietness, light a candle and so on. I think you can go either of those ways, really, and it depends on you and the group.
The idea you're doing it within the group or attached to it rather than a separate kind of, it's nice to meet here today, but how about we meet together on a Wednesday evening? So it's more integrated.
Yeah, Guy, I mean, that third option is obviously a real possibility, but I'm just very mindful that there are only so many hours in the week. And, you know, if we keep multiplying meetings, it gets really time consuming. And every time you have a meeting at a different time of the week, we know, I mean, just imagine you've got your coffee morning. Well, you know that group can come on Thursday mornings because they're there. But every time you say another time of the week, you're going to lose so many people because of that. And the thing about it is, I actually don't know why every church with every outreach activity doesn't do this, because it's so simple. You've got a coffee morning. Why on earth don't you just have 10 minutes spirituality at the end? It's an optional extra. My guess is in most groups, you know, a third of the people might stay behind. And then after a while, you know, you have your little, light your candle, a bit of quietness, you read a spiritual writing or a passage from scripture, have some silent prayers, some spoken prayer and so on, you know, till 10 minutes max. After a while, people will start saying, can't we discuss the spiritual reading? Or you can say to them, would you like to discuss it? And people can say, yeah, we'd quite like to do that. Well, so we extended the group to 25 minutes. Would that be okay? Yeah, that's fine. You've got a little congregation attached to your coffee morning. It's emerging there in front of you. You know, maybe there are 4 people in it. Well, that's not a problem. I mean, I'm an Anglican, you know, Church of England, we got stacks of congregations of about 4 or 5 people. So, you know, it's another little, but it's a group of people who, you know, call them what you will, a small Christian community, whatever, a little congregation that's emerging around Jesus and exploring Jesus in a way that they didn't do before. Now, I simply can't understand why every single outreach group in the Church of England doesn't do that, because it's so easy.
I wonder, Mike, just a thought whether some of the answer to Guy's question is based on how this group has started, in the unwritten contract between who's hosting it and the people that are coming, whether this is a spiritual group or, you know, in terms of an outreach activity, that, you know, there's a sort of unwritten contract that this isn't a spiritual group. And so whether that emerges into something that's spiritual, or whether you put something afterwards, would be based upon, you know, whether this is new and that intention is there at the beginning, or it's something you're adding on to something that already exists, and it might sort of unbalance what the intent, or it may go against what the intention was at the beginning of that group. I guess that might.
I think that unwritten contract is really important. If the group is a sort of luncheon club, we meet with older people for lunch and that's it, then, you know, you might be able to introduce conversations with a difference, but you'd have to do that with everyone's permission, and they would all have to like that. But you could, without jeopardizing the integrity of the group, offer something after the group has met, adjacent, and that you can do that. And you could do that with any group. So it might be that there are a couple of you who are aware of a secular group that meets, you know, a drop-in center for unemployed people. And you might just go to the leaders of that group and say, if we offered a spirituality zone at the end, call it spiritual welfare or whatever, would that be an addition to your group? Would you be happy for us to do it? We'll be delighted to offer that. And so you can do that without jeopardizing, as I say, the integrity of the group, because it's always optional.
Great. Does that answer your question, Guy?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Great. Tim, Tim, do you want to ask yours or make your comment?
Yeah, thank you. I'm aware. I've been aware of the material for a while, and I'm looking to ways in which we can proliferate it through our diocese and get people who've maybe never thought of doing this kind of thing before. Just kind of we've got 650 churches here who, you know, various different, you know, it's Church of England, so it's broad. But I was thinking about what you were sharing about that kind of mutuality in the study, or, you know, when you come to the Bible talk. And I really like that idea. I know someone who's kind of experimenting with that in our diocese already, and it's going great guns. However, I was just wondering, for a lot of our parishes, you know, that sometimes it's the clergy that end up being the ones that get the ideas and get the energy and get things going. And I wondered how disingenuous it is to have someone sat there with a collar saying, "Oh, I don't know, what do you know?" Often, you know, there is that kind of authority thing that goes with people look to the collar and go, "So what's the answer then?" You know, and especially with some of our Christians who've maybe been schooled in that way of thinking, how do you break out of that? And how do you pretend, you know, you've not had the benefit of the theological education?
Tim, I think that's a great question. I think it's very pertinent. And so, like all the ideas in this resource, you kind of have to adapt them and bend them to your particular personality and context. And so, I mean, you know, I'm ordained myself in the Church of England. So, I mean, think if I was doing it, if it was a factual question and I knew the answer, I probably would answer it. But I think if it was a question of opinion, I might be saying to folks, you know, I have one opinion, but you all have opinions too, and my opinion isn't necessarily right. And actually, one of the problems with the church down the ages, and one reason people get put off by the church, is the clergy always think they're right. So on that basis, you know, let's just share our views. I'll share mine, but don't expect mine to be any better necessarily than yours, you know. Something like that, I might say. So I think, you know, yeah, adapting this is appropriate. You could, going further, you know, say, you know, as a group, I'm here leading you at the moment, but I hope the time will come when I don't have to go on leading you. You'll be able to lead yourselves, and I can go off and start another group. And so to get us used to that, when you ask a factual question, let's have the habit that I don't answer that question, others in the group do, or you Google it, and you could introduce it that way.
The issue with that, Michael, though, is, you know, I'm with you on this. I'm quite, you know, open to see what the Spirit does. But we've got some people who are used to being in control, and, you know, Google is amazing, but also you get everything, don't you? how do you can't say, oh, you can look at that website, but don't look at them, they're unorthodox or they're heretical. I mean, how do you make sure you don't get a consensus around something that's unorthodox?
Yeah, I think Tim, I think my response to that would be, if I was going to start referring, if it was a factual question, then Wikipedia and so on will probably get it right. But if it's a going deeper question, then I think I would have my favorite websites and so on to go to, and I would kind of refer them to one of my favorite websites and say, why don't you go to that? There's a great blog here. Go and see what Tom Wright has said about this subject or whatever, and then come back and share it with the group. So I think the minister in that case can play a really good role, helpful role in pointing people to helpful resources.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Tim. Any more questions? Yeah, Richard, go for it.
Well, a couple of comments. A colleague of mine, Church Army colleague, says, I never answer, but I might have a response. I like that. No, I think there's lots that's really positive here. I think that I was asking the question about what might you call this time afterwards. We talked about a spiritual space, a soul space, and I don't know if it was Mary or Jean made the comment, if you had an older group, and I was thinking, okay, we're just going to have a sort of a quieter time, but saying, and this is what we'll do. So I just didn't know if there were other ideas on what you might call a kind of little session afterwards that we've been describing.
I would love to hear some ideas, and not least because I'm currently rewriting our Godsend resource, which contains some of these ideas in it. And I would love to be able to have some alternative names to suggest people. I think Soul Space is great.
Yeah, I think your list was a good one, Richard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess sort of ownership of that as. Sorry, go on, Richard.
As I was going to say, just to kind of the whole stepping stones things you're talking about, people. Not everyone's going to want this sort of thing, and that's why having it as an option, I think, is really important, because you can't necessarily take everyone with you, but you might take a few. I've often used the phrase, we often try to do more, and sometimes we're simply meant to do different things, as in stop doing something and do something else, or do things differently. And again, this is a just do things differently, isn't it, approach. It doesn't mean more work necessarily, or more time, or trying to get people to come at a different time. It's just affirming all of those things, really.
Yeah.
And Richard, I agree with you. And the more we can encourage ourselves, others in our congregations, to just build on what they're already doing, the better.
Yeah. I'm thinking about, sorry, Mike.
So I was just going to say, and then I was just saying, I've been interested. I work in the Oxford Diocese and have had all sorts of conversations, particularly with clergy in rural areas. And the conversations often start, well, tell us what sort of outreach activities you had before lockdown. What are you hoping to start again? And they'll list one or two, and then we'll have conversations. And then later on in the conversation, they'll just drop in, oh, yes, and in our coffee morning, we do this. But they never think of that coffee morning as an outreach activity. They just sort of take it for granted. And I think there are lots of things that we do in our churches sometimes that we just take for granted, but which have the potential to be outreach activities if we just pause and think about them.
So I just had a couple of thoughts, Richard, in terms of, one was about ownership of the space. That actually, if you say what you're going to do a couple of times and then people start joining you, and then invite them to give a name to the space, there's that sense of it being their space, not yours. And I don't know what the other thing I was going to say was, I think, so Renew Wellbeing, which is a project, a national project that's sort of springing up in places around well-being, but rather than having something afterwards, they have a particular space within the space. So they might be in a big hall but in a corner of the hall, there's a circle of chairs where they're doing this activity that people can join in with at a point during. So, you know, so you've got the coffee morning happening, but you might have this activity happening during the normal times, but people choose to go to that space rather than stay afterwards for a different time. So that's just yeah, one other idea there. Oh, did I see your hand up, Guy, or just no? Yeah. Go for it if anyone's got any more questions.
Yeah, I was just saying what I love about it is the minimal preparation. You know, you could do 10 minutes thinking beforehand and then facilitate a group quite easily and quickly. So I like that. Yes, so I can imagine using it in the context we've got. I can imagine using it. We've tried various other ways, but just felt a bit clunky. So I think I might have a go at this and see what happens.
Great. So Guy and others, again, if you go, you know, go to that discussion, discovery section of the resource. And the animation talks about Bible talk, but the written guide gives you 3 other approaches, which are all very similar. One's based on sort of Lectio Divina approach, bite, chew, savor, and digest, I think we call it. And then there are 2 other approaches. One's based on godly play, and one's a sort of kingdom type approach. And they're all based they all have one thing in common. They're all experiential. They encourage people to relate to the story in terms of their experience. You know, what do we experience? So they're not, the key thing about these approaches is they're not like traditional discovery Bible study, which uses questions like, what's this saying about God? What's this saying about human beings? And the problem with those sorts of questions is that inquirers begin to panic inside and say, what happens if I get the wrong answer? And all the approaches that we've just sort of suggest are approaches where there can be no right and wrong answers. You know, this is what I think about the passage.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we just really, so yeah, I'd encourage you, those 4, the Bible talk might work brilliantly for you. I agree with you, absolutely no preparation, hardly. Just all you have to think about is what study we're going to do. And the other brilliant thing about Bible talk and all the other approaches is you can just take one question at a time. So you might just do 10 minutes of Bible study. So if, for example, you were introducing your soul space at the end of a coffee morning or something, and you wanted just to expand the Bible reading bit, you could expand it into just 10 minutes of Bible discussion by just having that first question. If this story happened today, what would it look like? And then the next week, you recap what you've done, ask the second question, what's it saying to you, what's it saying to me? And then the third week, you recap the previous 2 weeks, ask the third question, you know, could it make a difference to our lives? How? Hey, folks, let's go and do an experiment. Let's see if it does make a difference. And then you come back over 4 weeks. So in terms of your saving time point, this is absolutely brilliant because you only have to think once a month, what passage are we going to look at? So this is so massively wonderful for all those who are really busy. And you don't, and because it's so experientially based, you don't even have to work out what's a good exegesis of this passage. You just have to be ready to let it flow. So you're absolutely right. It's time efficient, and the same applies to the other options.
Because as you were speaking earlier, I was thinking it's almost like a Lectio, really, isn't it? That, Lectio Divina. You're almost doing that. I mean, you wouldn't call it that, for goodness sake, but you know what I mean? You're kind of doing that. You're approaching the passage and saying, what does it say to you? You know, what does it say to me? What's it doing to you? How are you feeling about this? How does that relate to everyday life? And do you disagree with it? Do you agree with it? You know, all that kind of...
You're absolutely right. It is Lectio approach, but we include Lectio as one of the other options, but we just describe it as bite, chew, savor, and digest. You know, bite on the verse, what phrase sticks in your mind, chew over it, why is it in my mind, savor it, what's the value of this, what am I getting out of it, you know, digest, blah. So, you know, it's exactly that. So I think Tim was going to say something.
Yes, go for it, Tim.
Just on a practical note, would you recommend bring in Bibles for people to look at themselves? Would you recommend a certain app, or would you print it out? Because I know sometimes having a full Bible there, I know they kind of give them nice covers these days, but it can seem a little bit imposing depending on what you give them. And also getting the consistency of, the version, that kind of thing. What's been your experience, Michael?
Tim, what I would do is I would go off and photocopy some version, whichever version I want to use from the internet. I'd just print off the story and hand it out, because I agree, most people won't have Bibles anyway. It can be a bit intimidating to give them a Bible. I'll just give them the story. I mean, someone was telling me the other day, I was talking to him, he's in St. Albans diocese, and he was saying, Mike, I was doing this the other evening, and he said, I was really brassed off. We were doing it by Zoom. Most of my group didn't turn up. I only had about 2 who were coming. And, I almost canceled the meeting. And then we did the little Bible study discussion. And the person said to me, he said, I've never read this story. They did the prodigal son. He said, that is about the most amazing story I have ever heard in my life. I never thought God could be like that. It's brilliant. So you see, doing these stories, especially with people who don't come to church, they really are, literally, it's terrible to say this, they're magic. It's fantastic.
Brilliant. Any more questions? Mary, Linda, Jane, Eddie.
Just to comment that it does, I think one of the things that I find is that just anything that builds people up and gives them confidence about the fact that they might be able to share something is just really key, because the from where I'm working, I'm a pioneer minister, and I work kind of across Thirsk and the kind of surrounding towns, so a little market town in North Yorkshire. But the thing that I observe is just that people just do not have confidence in sharing their faith, and they just get blindsided by words like mission or evangelism, whereas this is just it just makes it really accessible. So yeah, but noting Tim's comment about if you are the person in the collar, people hide behind you, don't they? So it makes me think actually just getting out of the room, letting just people crack on with it.
Mary, I think
it's very accessible.
That's fantastic, Mary. I love hearing that, and I agree. If you can get out of the room, that's great, but you may have to hold their hands to begin with. But I think building on something you've just said, if any of you want to, if you Google fruitfulness framework, Church of England, you may have seen that. There's been this report that the Church of England done, this little survey they did. They asked 200 people in 20 fresh expressions. And they asked them a series of questions that connected with all sorts of aspects of discipleship. Whether it's relationships with other people, relationships with people outside the church, relationships with others in the church, relationships with yourself, how you feel about yourself. The whole series of questions they asked. And the sort of question they asked, the one I remember is, there was a question about whether they were praying regularly when your fresh expression started. And 44% said yes. And then the question was, are you praying regularly now? And 66% said yes. And on all the questions that were asked, there was that upward trend which could be connected to their involvement in fresh expressions. Most of these people were Christians who, I think 3/4 of them were Christians, or 80% were Christians who were answering this. They were the sort of core group within the fresh expression. And so you see, my point is that if we can encourage our lay people to start one of these little outreach activities, and then better still to put a little bit of spiritual component into it as a spiritual extra, then what it does for their own growth in their walk with Jesus is phenomenal. When I saw these results, I used to lead a church down in Taunton years and years ago. I thought to myself, gosh, if I'd seen these results as a result of my preaching, the preaching of my colleagues, our small groups, our corporate worship and so on, if I saw those results, I would think, wow, this is amazing, sort of nirvana's arrived, paradise. So So I think if we can really encourage our lay people to be doing these sorts of outreach activities, and if better still, we can get them to do a little bit of spirituality as part of that, the fruits we will see in terms of personal discipleship and growth will, I think, be really phenomenal.
Yeah. So you're basically saying that this is great for discipleship, and forgetting the mission and evangelism side of it. Actually, if you invite people to participate in this, it's good for their own discipleship. I think it's worth mentioning as well, Mike, that in the animation it goes through this quite quickly, but the idea is that not just those who are Christians need to be involved in the facilitation of this, because it's only 4 questions. Anybody can ask those questions. A member of the group who is one of those that's sort of not yet a Christian or is on that journey, they can be asking the questions as well. It's not even sort of you as clergy handing on to lay leaders. Actually, anybody in the group can ask those questions and be responsible for the facilitation of the group. Yeah. We've got just under 10 minutes. We don't have to say, oh, yeah, Jane, great, another question.
I was just wondering, in your experience, how long it takes for people to respond to the invitation to stay on afterwards for a little bit extra, whether you perhaps need to plant some Christians in the group to say, oh, well, I'm going, will you come? or whether that's a little bit sneaky. You know, or would you need to try it sort of 3 times before anybody comes, or what's your experience?
Jane, I think my response to that would be it depends on how well you know the group. So I think if you've been running the group for quite a while, a couple of years, and you know them well, then you can issue that kind of invitation and be hopeful that you get a positive response. I remember hearing about one rural church where I think they had about 30 people in their Wednesday lunchtime group, and they issued this invitation. Something like 25 people stayed behind. And the leaders, they knew them all. They had lots of, strong relationships. Stay behind just 10 minutes. We'll go and gather around in the chancel around the holy table and light a candle and so on. And people just did that. It was so easy. If you've just started the group and it's only been running for 3 months, then I think you'd get a kind of a different response. And so I would build deep foundations, run the group, let that coffee morning bereavement group, whatever it is, let it really take root, and then see what happens. I mean, another thing you can do, I can't remember whether this is in the resource, but, I'm just thinking, maybe, I don't know, maybe you're running a sort of bereavement group. And if you wanted, you could just download some pictures from the internet, cut them in half with sort of jagged, edges, just distribute them, as it were, on the table, on the floor. So, invite people to pick up one half of the picture, go and find someone with the other half, put the picture together, and then what is that picture saying to you that might have some spiritual component? This is sort of something I think you could introduce into a group quite easily, actually, and especially if you're the clergy, the minister, and you've convened this group, and it's a bereavement, getting over bereavement group, bereavement recovery group. No one will be surprised if you introduce a spiritual component. Again, it very much depends on you and the group and how you feel and so on. But I think there's a lot of these things that you can do, and people are actually sometimes surprised when we as clergy don't introduce explicit spiritual stuff. They think, well, what's going on here? Why is he or she a clergy person? So I think we should be confident to do this.
Yeah, and there's generally people take the path of least resistance, and if you're not expecting people to get up and move to a different room, that actually they just need to stay where they are. To be part of the next thing, most people will stay rather than get up and go. And I think, we need to be encouraged and hopeful about what the response might be. Any more questions?
if you're just starting a group, this is a great time recovery. As we come out of the pandemic and people are sort of taking a deep breath and saying, do I still have a group? Have I got any volunteers? What are we going to do? And so on. You might just start it on a slightly different basis. So you might say, hey, folks, stay with the example, Luncheon Club is reconvening. What we're going to do is we're going to do it like we did before, but we're going to do this afterwards, or we're going to do this as an element within it. And I just wanted to say, I was thinking about that bereavement group, and I think I'd be saying to clergy, look, folks, when you do your funeral visits, when you do your pre-funeral visit, just give the folks you connect with a little invitation card to a sort of, I don't know what you call it, let's call it a sort of bereavement or a recovery group or a grief recovery group or something that's going to meet in the vicarage. And you just invite them to the vicarage, and it's one at a time. One comes and you do this very simple Bible study with them, discovery, Bible talk or whatever. And one comes and then another comes, and perhaps in the first year you just have 2 people. And then the next year, perhaps you have 2 more people, and you talk about it, and you mention it in the funeral service. If anyone's interested in looking, funerals are a time when sometimes we pause and ask, gosh, what's life all about? Well, if you're interested in that, I've got this little group that meets and helps people who've been bereaved to ask themselves some of these questions. Why don't you just come and join us? We look at stories about Jesus, who's known as one of the world's greatest spiritual teachers, and we just have some cake and coffee together, and we have a good time. And what I want to say, I'd love just to persuade clergy that they could build a new congregation simply on the back of their funeral visits. 1, 2 a year. After 5 years, you've got 10 people in a rural area and some urban areas. That is larger than almost your main congregation. So, I think there are great opportunities here. And again, it comes back to the theme. This isn't any extra time for you, except that 1 hour in the vicarage. But you're going to do your funeral visits, you're going to do your funeral service, so why not make the most of them?
Great. Thank you, Mike. I think we're at the end of our hour now. Hopefully everybody managed to ask the questions they've got, but you should be able to contact us, I think, through the website. I'm just going to put 2 website links there. So you've got the sharingjesus.life. Hopefully you've been there, but very simple web address, sharingjesus.life. And if you go to fxresourcing.org, I just wanted to wave you two things in front of you. So this comes out of Fresh Expressions, and Mike has written these 2 books, 21st Century Christian, with a colleague in the US, Michael Beck, talking about how Fresh Expressions might emerge in a church context. Godsend, we have this Godsend resource in app, and it's on our FX Resourcing website, and also in a book version that you can order from the FX Resourcing shop. And those will help you when we've talked about discipleship at the end of an outreach activity, but this, how do new congregations emerge? How do fresh expressions of church emerge? Those 2 books will help you with that. Any closing thought, Mike, before I pray for us as we go our separate ways?
No, just to say it's been great meeting with you all, and just to say if you're interested in some of this and you want a little book to put in the hands of 1 or 2 of your lay people, perhaps a church warden if you're in Church of England or something like that. I wrote that 21st Century Christian book with Michael Beck for that reason. It's got little pictures inside. It's got lots of stories. It's really quick to read. You probably only need to read the first half of it to get the picture, to get the general message. And so I just encourage you to look at that book and maybe give it to some of your lay people and see whether that begins to spark an interest.
Great. Let me pray for you. Thank you for being part of the conversation today, and we hope the resource is a blessing to you as you seek to share Jesus with those around you. Father, we thank you for this time. I want to thank you for each of these people who have felt they wanted to be here today, and for all that they might do with this resource beyond this. But whether they use it or not, Lord, we just pray for them in their desire to introduce people to you, to share your love with others, to be part of your mission and what you're doing in this world. And I pray that you would bless them in that. May they know you're leading and follow where you lead. We ask this in your name and for your glory. Amen.
Amen.
Bless you, everybody. Really good to see you. Take care.
Thank you.